Welcome to our weekly interview episode at Presence. This week, we are joined by filmmaker, writer, and director CB Smith. CB considers herself a Black multicultural director and camerawoman. She's based out of Oakland. She's the co-founder of Together Pictures. She specializes in creating projects for diverse audiences. In addition, I know that she also works with nonprofits. She does a lot of videos and helps companies and organizations broaden their scope in social media and so forth. But CB, it would be so much more fun if you could fill in the blanks for us.
I co-founded Together Pictures with another filmmaker to meet a need for companies. I always say creativity is an act of courage. And we really try to create an environment where everybody feels comfortable being courageous. I think there's a lot of pressure on small businesses, on big businesses, on government agencies, on nonprofits to create video content. But I won't call it a pain point. It's a nervous point for them, right? How do we do this? How do we work with a filmmaker? And we at Together Pictures really partner with our clients and really try to create the media that they want to create, as opposed to stepping in and sort of ordering them around, right? We let them come to the table and we come to the table and we plan it all together. Most of the content that we create supports the brand. We're not a brand agency, but we are creating media, whether it's photographs, whether it's video, whether it's a participatory project, whether it's fiction, whether it's nonfiction. The projects that we're creating are supporting the existing brand, helping to evolve it, helping to make sure that folks have a good relationship with their customers or their clients, whoever their public is.
I love that. And when we think about filmmaking, when we think about videos, and you've worked on several feature films in addition to documentaries and helping organizations, what made you say, you know what? Yes, I love writing and filming films, but I also want to work with organizations, particularly nonprofit organizations, because not only is there a need, but they sometimes, as you said, they reach this point where there's some confusion in terms of how they present themselves. Based on that need, what made you think, I want to work with them?
It's interesting. When I was in film school, which is a kind of art school, right? I think there was a certain, it's such a harsh word, but it really is the right word. There was a certain arrogance among the students where people would sort of say, no, I'm going to do this kind of film. I'm not going to do television. Or no, I shot my project with this kind of camera. I'm not going to shoot video, right? At the time I went to film school, everything was shot on film, right? And I just never saw it that way. I never saw those as very different things. For me, the joy of filmmaking is in the art of collaboration. And so if I'm collaborating on a fiction project with actors that, maybe it's an independent film and, we're going to send it to festivals and folks are hoping to make it big in Hollywood from this project, it's really the same skill set as if I'm working with a nonprofit with a group of children who are creating a video that they're going to show at the end of the semester to their parents and their family members, their kin, right? So I see them as the same joyful process. I think it comes from my mother. My mother was a scientist and a doctor, but before she had done that, she was an actor and a singer. And I heard her multiple times in my life saying to other young creatives, well, do you want to act or do you want to be famous? Do you want to write or do you want to be famous? Because those are two different things. And she really was a believer that you could find spaces, whether that was regional theater or whether that was working for the local newspaper or what have you, where you could make art and make beautiful art that might even be better than the things that people were famous for, as long as you weren't kind of chasing that high, that stimulation of millions and millions of people approve of me. Ultimately, both of them have value. There are a lot of people now who make movies that are never going to be Scorsese. They're never going to be Spike Lee. They're never going to be Julie Dash. They're going to make movies that give them joy or that communicate really well within their community. And that's valuable. That's important.
Yes.
That's beautiful.
CB, I really connect with what you're saying, and I feel that it's to understand this idea that there's value in everything. And at the end of the day, people want to see themselves reflected. It's this idea of the shared experience. Oh, yeah, that happened to me. And when you find those spaces of intersection, of convergence that you're talking about, there's more room for reflection and inclusivity. And there's room for everybody to find joy in what they do and how we express ourselves. And in your case, it's through film and media.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear you use the terms like high culture and low culture, because you're right, they are terms of the world of academia, right, which has its own set of language. And I think we're at this really amazing point in history where, because diversity has become an embraced value, I think those terms are becoming replaced, right?
Yes.
I majored in Spanish as an undergraduate, and we definitely, like in Spanish, there was even more conversation about high culture and low culture. And I saw it as a strategy of colonialism, right?
Mm-hmm.
There was this effort in colonialism to sort of elevate things that were European and to downplay things that were of the new lands, right? Whether that was North America, South America, Africa, Asia. There was this effort by the colonizing countries to say our culture is more close to God, is more close to our royalty, right? We say in English, we say the Queen's English to mean proper English, or at least people did when I was a kid. But
Mm-hmm.
now we understand, like, there is no proper English. There are many forms of English, and they're all equal and they're all valuable. And I think the same is true of art, that this idea that, I mean, even the art world uses terms like outsider art, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, outside of who? Outside of what? You're
Yeah.
actually talking about outside of the elite, whether that's because it's somebody who has a disability, whether that's because it's somebody who's self-trained, whether that's because it's somebody who is of a lower income. Like, outsider art encompasses all those things. And those artists are insiders in their own community. They are only
Yes.
outsiders to the elite. So I think we like I said, we exist in this a really amazing time in history where people are starting to do, you could call it roots work, right? They're starting to look for the roots of their heritage, and can I get back to that place? I know for me, as somebody who is mixed race, there's also a really interesting, like you said, connection that happens where I'm able to sort of connect different roots of mine and find things that are the same and things that are different. In documentary, documentary's roots are in academia. They're in anthropological film, which for many, many decades was basically people from academia taking a camera or an audio recorder and going into a community that was not their own and sort of trying to document it and judging it and evaluating it without cultural context. One of the few exceptions to that is Zora Neale Hurston.
Right. Yes.
So Zora
Yes.
Neale Hurston sort of takes recording equipment into a community that is her own and pioneers a whole different way of approaching anthropology.
Mm-hmm.
Not how does the other do this, but how does my community do this? And I think there's a similar thing in filmmaking. I often am thinking very consciously of the camera as, even in still photography, as a conversation, right? I see you, you see me.
Yes.
It's not
like
just
that.
me documenting you. It's the moment before I take the picture, the moment after I take the picture, I am smiling, or I am making some kind of gesture or facial movement to sort of double check, like, can I take this picture? I have definitely been in situations where people have said to me, don't take my picture. And either I don't take it, or if I've already taken it, I open up the camera and I delete the picture. If it's appropriate, I might even show the person, this is the picture that I took of you. Do I have permission to keep it? And if I don't, okay, even if I love the picture, right?
Yeah.
Because it is a conversation to me. It's not our language around cameras is so wrong. Right? We talk about taking a photo,
Right.
right? We talk about shooting someone, right? It's problematic language. And so I definitely have tried to come up with different terms, okay, am I capturing a photo? Am I saving a photo? Am I, making a motion picture or making an
Uh-huh.
image? Am I sharing an image? In general, people use cameras to document something for sharing, right? So there's that conversation too. It's not just I had the conversation, whether it was nonverbal or verbal, with the person whose image is now in my camera, but also I'm going to take that image and show it to someone 9 times out of 10, right?
Right.
And
Yes.
so that's a conversation as well. I went to this place on vacation and I thought this was important to share and this was important to share, and look how this is and look how that is, and isn't it fascinating, right? We all do that. We all do
Yes.
that.
And, as you make these very important points, it makes me think about how much the camera, whether it is still camera or a motion camera, has changed in the last 100 years. Because, 100 years ago, if you were taking a photograph or you were filming something, you had to be still.
Yeah.
You didn't have a lot of movement. Now we did start to see some movement in the 20s with the photograph type of camera, but for the most part, there was still a lot of stillness. The same thing was happening with motion pictures, which is why when Manhattan came out, it was such a groundbreaking short film because of these different angles that were taken of Manhattan. And there was a certain highbrow quality to that type of film because something like that had not been done before. But now, with the way accessibility has changed, you can make a film on your phone. You can hold a phone and create a small film. You can, take photographs and delete them on the spot the way you talked about or not. Things have changed. And that brings, I think, also more power to people in a way that wasn't there before. Because, going back to what you mentioned earlier, this idea about documentary really being grounded in anthropology, and a lot of photography was quite similar when we think about, some of the early type of photographs that were taken. Yes, some of them were interesting artistic projects, but there was also a lot of anthropology behind them. It makes me think of some early, 20th century photographers that would put a right angle prism in their camera and they would face one direction, but the photo is being taken in a different direction. So then people didn't know that they were being photographed. So there was these intrinsic voyeuristic qualities to it, and in a way, power that wasn't perceived in that light 100 years ago, but today is just unacceptable because we know we don't allow that type of misuse of our images, but also of our person. So there's these changes of ethics that have happened, but there's also a space where people could do different things that weren't being done before. And it seems like you are in this incredible moment where you're exploring all these new ways of approaching filmmaking, of approaching videos that when you were in film school, it wasn't done. And that's not that long ago within the larger scope of things.
Yeah, I mean, it's tricky because I think one of the things that's unique about both photography and film as compared to some of the other forms of art, of fine art, and visual art, right, is that it has always been a combination of art and craft. And
Mhm.
because of that, there have always been people from a variety of economic backgrounds doing the work. So, whether it's like the original silver plates where people are literally mixing their own eggs and
Mhm.
silver to make the plate that they stick in the camera and expose to make the image, right?
Mhm.
There's always been a range of folks. And I think that bears acknowledging that at the
Yes.
same time as you had certainly anthropologists who were sort of abusing the power of the camera and using it. There's a really rough history in colonial Africa, for example, of
Yes.
photographers coming in and literally reposing people in ways to make it look like it was anthropological documentation, but actually to demean, to elevate the white people and to demean and deflate the sort of power in the image of the Black people. Like that was a thing. Like not everything that we look at and assume is anthropological is. It's often quite biased and has a political intention to it from that era. But you have these amazing photography studios, Black owned, that pop up in the 1960s, country by country, as those
Yes.
countries achieve their independence, and create these incredible community portraits. So it's not a new thing, this
Yeah.
idea of sort of like the camera of the people. It's not. It's been there always. I do think that there was a point where the equipment got so expensive and the methods of distribution became so removed that it was challenging for filmmakers when I first started in the early 90s, right? But even then, you sort of have the summer of, what was it, 1994 maybe, where you had all these Black filmmakers all of a sudden managing to get access to Hollywood. Everybody from Matty Rich to Spike Lee, who sort of opened the door for everybody, to Julie Dash, to, there were all these filmmakers who had, maybe it was 95, but there was a summer, where basically 20 different filmmakers, Black filmmakers, had movies released in movie theaters, which was not an easy thing to access, but it was accessible to them. And now the media has been democratized, where because everybody has a phone in their pocket, anybody can film anything at any time and place it on the internet and self-distribute, which is really incredible. But
It
go
is.
ahead.
I wanted to highlight something very important that you were mentioning, CB. For those of us that are not Black or African American, I think it's important to underscore what you mentioned earlier about the 90s and Black filmmakers, because many of us who are not Black don't understand. We know, okay, there wasn't a lot of Black people who were filmmakers, right? We hear that, we know that, but from a real historical lens, many of us who do not come from that community don't really fully grasp what it meant in the 90s for there to be these rising filmmakers and these doors opening.
I should mention, just in terms of all of the groups that have been othered by mainstream media, right?
Mhm.
Whether that's women, whether that's Asian American community, depending on which backgrounds you have, Hispanic American community, Latinx community, right? Chicano community, BTQIA. I should be clear that there were always many filmmakers from those communities. Film that was made before, I want to say like the early 1940s, used nitrate film, which decomposes and can even become explosive. And so there are filmmakers, there's a filmmaker out of Chicago, for example, African-American filmmaker, that we are aware he exists. His name is escaping me in this moment, but I can email it to you later. But we are aware he exists, but we literally have none of his films. Even Oscar Micheaux, who's considered sort of the father of Black cinema, right, who was making silent films, I think we only have about half of his films preserved and existing at this time. It's not that people weren't there. It's that at a certain point, the systems of distribution became onerous Oscar Michaud, one of the things he's famous for is he would take photographs in Harlem, in all
Mhm.
the nightclubs, the famous sort of the Savoy and, all these different
Yeah.
clubs. And he would go through the South and meet with the movie theater owners. And he would say, these are still frames from my latest film. They were not, right? And he'd say, but if you want to be the theater in town that has exclusive rights to show this film, I need this kind of payment to secure that. Then he would take that money and go make the movie that he said he had already made and then bring it around to those theaters. And so the methods of distribution were very accessible. You flash forward to, the 60s, 70s, 80s, and the movie theaters are starting to be owned by big multinational corporations. In general, distribution was very difficult in the 1990s. And the big corporations that have the movie theaters and the networks, the television networks, right, all suddenly realized that there was money to be made in films for Black community made by Black directors. The other thing that happened at that time, which isn't true anymore, is because people were investing in video for their home viewing systems, videotapes, a lot of older white theater goers were not going to the theaters in the 90s. And for moviegoers in the 90s was a young Black man or woman between the ages of teenager and young adulthood. So there was an audience there too. So there was sort of a bunch of things that came together to make this unique thing in history. Shortly after that, there were a couple of Spanish movies that came out that did better than Hollywood thought they would do, right?
Mhm.
So like Water for Chocolate is one of those films. I don't think they thought they had an art house movie. They thought they had a beautiful movie with a little bit of surrealism in it that they were going to show in art house theaters. And then Spanish speaking families started showing up. And so the film made millions of dollars, and Hollywood went, oh, okay, we'll pay for Mi Familia, which was a feature about Mexican American history in Los Angeles. So it wasn't just Black filmmakers, but there was this sort of realization by Hollywood of like, oh, these are audiences that we can create product for. And then the filmmakers who were always there suddenly had opportunity and access to bigger audiences than they had before. And
Thank
bigger
you.
budgets too. Yeah.
Thank you, CB. And you gave us a phenomenal synopsis of a very rich history. I do think it's important for our audience to know this because many of us don't. And we do take for granted what we have now, all
Yeah.
the accessibility, the distribution, me filming this podcast. I wouldn't have been able to do this 20 years ago. Let's circle back a little bit more to you, to your work. And I do want to say, I really do like the quote you said earlier about, and I'm reading it, about creativity requiring courage. I had never thought of creativity in those terms before. Can you talk about that?
One of the things that you realize very quickly when you start videotaping people is that we all have internal dialogue that is constantly playing in our head. The minute you put somebody down in front of a camera to speak, all of that internal dialogue starts to show up in their face. You see them chew their lip, or you see them start to say something and stop. And then they say, oh, I need to do that again. It happens to all of us. In 35 years of filming, I've only ever met one person who liked themselves on camera.
Wow.
It was so rare that it was actually disturbing to me when it happened. It was just very uncomfortable and bizarre because it was so rare, because usually people are very critical of themselves. And it's hard to take risks when you are critical of yourself, right? And then you add into it other people. So being afraid that other people will judge you or criticize you. And creativity, by definition, is the act of doing something different or new, or taking two elements that have existed before and combining them in a way that maybe is unusual. And so to do that thing, to be creative, to take a chance, to be different, right? To call attention to yourself and be like, hey, look at this thing I made, or look at this thing that I'm doing, sets you up for evaluation.
Yes.
And so if you're in a space where you are not supported, not made to feel like you're valuable, it can be even harder to do that. It's already hard, but it can be even harder. I happen to come from a family where the love language I sort of grew up with was telling you what to do. And often caution.
That sounds a little familiar.
Like, and I really do believe that some of it, in some cases, for some people, is a trauma response. But do realize it came from a place of love, right? Like, I had people in my family who would say, oh, you shouldn't do that way because this is going to go wrong. Or have you thought about all the things that could go wrong? Or have you prepared for, this might not work out? When I first moved to LA, right? Like, there was a lot of kind of like, I'm just saying this from a place of love to prepare you. And so as I've gotten older and understood more about that being part of my origin story and the origin story of so many people I know, I've really come to understand that just in life in general, but in addition to my work, one of the ways I can show leadership is by showing kindness, is by creating safety, is by letting people know you are supported. I am here as your cheerleader, as your coach, to celebrate your victories with you, to help you bandage your wounds when they happen. And if we do it wrong, we can do it again. And so you build, in work settings, you build space for iteration, for improvement, for a test run before we take the big leap. But for me, it comes from a heartfelt desire in every space I show up to creating environments where people feel comfortable and telling people, when they do a good job, you did a good job. That was amazing.
I really appreciate that you talked about kindness and leadership and how they go hand in hand. I remember several years ago at a job interview, someone asked me to describe my leadership. And I said, I lead from my authentic self. I am kind and compassionate. And people just gave me blank stares and didn't understand what I was talking about. Things are shifting. Now we hear more conversations around having an ethos of compassion and ethos of care. But a couple of years ago, that wasn't the case. And I think it's important to underscore and highlight that kindness is an important attribute of compassion. And it's something that you bring to your filmmaking. So you are courageous, even though sometimes you have doubts like all of us do. And I think that that's something that we see in these two documentaries that you have at the Oakland Film Festival.
I have one documentary and one narrative piece. Fiction piece at the Oakland Film Festival. The documentary, I was the cinematographer for. I was the camera and lighting person. I worked with the director, whose name is Tamara Perkins, to come up with a look for this documentary. And that documentary tells the story of a woman named Clarissa who's been fighting for universal childcare for many years. And it shows her efforts locally within Oakland and Alameda County to get a ballot measure. Well, I won't spoil the movie, but there are literally women who we spoke with who were homeless and couldn't get a job because they couldn't get childcare because there was a waiting list for childcare because there wasn't enough funding for everyone to get childcare. Can you imagine?
It's heartbreaking.
Yeah. And so that's the fight that Clarissa was fighting and continues to fight. Her goal ultimately is to get funding nationally so that all childcare, anyone who wants or needs childcare has access to it all over the country. We do that for K through 12.
Yes.
Why don't we do that for 0 through K?
Yes.
And that's not to say that you can't pay for private school but anyway, so Clarissa's amazing. She's such an inspiration. And the name of the film is Clarissa's Battle. And I said very early on to the director, I said, first of all, a lot of times when we see Black people on camera, Black Americans, my community, right? The story is told from a place of loss or struggle, right? Look at what this poor Black person is having to go through. Isn't this tragic, right? I said, and I'm really thankful that you brought me onto this project because I think we have the chance to actually come from an asset-based place, right? We're going to tell the story of a Black person who has overcome some hardship in her own life and also is doing incredible, important work. She's kind of like a superhero. And at that time, it was really trendy, especially for young women, but even women, you know, older women were sort of taking their cell phones and taking selfies, putting the camera above themselves, right? And kind of making a duck face and like, right? And taking their picture. That was the trend. And I was like, you know, I don't want the camera to look down on Clarissa.
Yes.
I want the camera to look up at her because she's a hero. And so I'm going to film Clarissa, like I'm just going to bring the camera a little below her and I'm going to film her looking up at her. And the director was like, are you sure that that's going to look good? And blah, blah, blah. And I was like, it looks good on men. Why wouldn't it look good on a woman?
Oh,
you know?
yes. Thank you.
Right.
Thank you.
And so that's
Yes.
what we did, you know, and in the end, it wound up being this idea of sort of Clarissa as a superhero wound up being inspiration for the director for the graphics that she did in the movie, wound up being inspiration for some of the ways that she edited the movie and some of the B-roll that we shot. You know, we sort of went and videotaped footage of Clarissa walking in slow motion, and you know, like it wound up being a visual theme throughout the whole piece. And so I'm really proud of that. So that's showing at the Oakland, that's actually closing the Oakland International Film Festival this year, that film. And it's being shown all over the country, both as a documentary that people are loving for, you know, as a film and storytelling, but also people can go to the website for Clarissa's Battle and actually arrange a screening in order to educate people about the history of childcare, why universal pre-K is so important, and, you know, in some cases partnering with local agencies who are fighting that fight, right? So that people can sort of be motivated and inspired to join the fight for universal childcare. And the film also talks about like after school care as well, right? Like not just before kindergarten, but our schools get out at 3 and parents are working until 5 or 6 or 7, right? Like they shouldn't have they should have access to wonderful services at that time too. The second film that is showing, I can't say too much about because it has a surprise in it. So I will say that. But it really is in some ways an experimental film. It's a film about a young man on sort of the most important day of his life where he's trying to make a change in his life. We worked with some incredible actors. I can talk a little bit about, I had read this quote from Ryan Coogler, who's a director also from Oakland a couple of years ago. And he said, you know, my job as a director is to set the culture of the film, of the set, of the crew and the cast and everything. And I found that particularly inspiring as a leadership quote, right? I had always been somebody who was trying to create an environment where people felt secure, where they felt safe, where they knew that they had to be kind to each other because not all film sets are like that. So I had always done some of that work. But in this particular project, sort of, you know, as part of that inspiration, I created a little ritual for myself and the crew that basically encouraged us to, like when anyone would walk on set, any cast or crew, it encouraged me to sort of be like, hi, you know, I'm so glad that you're here. Welcome. And that's something that I had learned in after school programs to like, actually, no matter what time somebody walks in, it's the program's from 3 to 6. That kid who showed up at 5:30 wanted to be there.
Oh.
Now, maybe there was some weird reason why they weren't there at 3, but they want to be there. And so when they walk in at 5:30, you should pause whatever you're doing and say, welcome, thank you for coming. And then direct them to what, you know, like have a seat or whatever it is, right? And
I love that
so
you're doing that.
So I did that on set. Like some actors are on set every day. Some of them are only on set one day. Some crew are on set every day or only on set one day. And just that little action of making sure that whatever I was doing, I paused and I said, thank you. And I said, hello. And I see you, right? Even if I didn't literally say those words, that I took that moment shifted the culture in ways that were really surprising to me. It was really kind of beautiful. And I noticed a bunch of that same kind of like, I see you happening between cast members, between crew members, between cast and crew. And it was just beautiful. I was really inspired by the domino effect that that had.
And I have
So
a big smile just listening to you because I feel you're making me feel really good. You took us through this memory of an action and how it affected the crew, but I feel that energy and I also feel good. And right now, just by you sharing that and the enthusiasm that you're sharing with, I'm feeling your leadership in terms of the kindness and the compassion and how you're creating a sense of inclusivity for all of the crew on this film. I think it's absolutely fabulous. And not just that, on a real practical level, we need more of it because people who feel good at work not only are more productive, they're happy to be there. And it makes everybody else feel happy to be there. You collaborate more, you're more creative. It creates a very special environment where anything can happen. And that anything is usually something good.
yeah. And I will say the reverse happens too, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you create that environment where everybody's happy to be there and really enjoying the work and really enjoying each other, right? The people who are, you know, sort of negative for some reason feel really uncomfortable. And they either kind of find a way to kind of step on board and join the circus, you know, and be like, okay, like, let me try, you know,
Right.
or they remove themselves. They feel so uncomfortable that they're like, okay, these people are weird. Like they're so happy all the time. I can't hang. And that's okay, you know, but I'm seeing in this industry, you know, I worked on independent film sets and television shows and all those things in Hollywood, right? And we're in the midst of a strike right now, and so there's a
Yes.
lot of people having a lot of conversations online because they're not working 16 hours a day 6 days a week. They actually have time to engage with each other. And what's interesting is, you know, from some of the people that I used to work with on those sets, from conversations online, there's a shift in the culture happening, and it's going from, you know, well, this is how it is, you know, directors yell and scream, producers throw things, it's an abusive environment. Oh, well, right? To, oh, I worked with this director, or I worked with this producer, or, you know, this sort of team leader who was really kind and we worked really hard and they, you know, they never lost it, even when, you know, everything fell over and got broken and had to be rebuilt from scratch. They were really sweet to us, and that's rare, and that was kind of cool. To We're almost to the place where people are, I have heard tales of one or two projects where people have shut things down because
Mm.
leadership was not in a good healthy space, and people were like, that doesn't fly anymore, those days are over, you know.
Yes.
And that piece isn't happening as often as it could, but the fact that it's happening at all is a huge shift from when I was in my 20s and working in LA. A huge shift. And I think some of it's sort of like Me Too was almost like a symptom of a bigger
Yeah.
problem, right? Racism is a symptom of that same bigger problem, of
Mm-hmm.
that kind of like, you know, I'm in charge and I'm above you and I can treat you like crap, and, you know, you're expendable, you're replaceable. And some of that is shifting and going away. We need more of that. We need more
But from,
good people, but good-hearted
when,
people.
yeah, one of the things that I tell people, especially somebody who is of a younger generation, who oftentimes are very frustrated and just really plowing forward, demanding change. And first of all, I applaud them because many of them are a lot more courageous than I was at their age.
Yeah.
But I also tell them, look at what you've accomplished. Look at what we're accomplishing. Just 20 years ago,
Yeah.
we didn't have this. And sometimes, you know, you have to take one small step so that you can then leap forward 20 steps. So I think that, as you said, we need more of it, but we're seeing these openings. And to me, that is exciting. That fills my heart because, yes, I know we need a lot more change, a lot more systematic change where we are addressing larger issues, whether they be how you treat people in the workplace, whether it be related, to racism and other topics. But the fact that the change is happening, I'm actually inspired. And I really do believe that we are on the right path. So I'd like to basically tell our audience, yes, keep on pushing forward, but also celebrate where we are at now. Because I can tell you, 20 years ago, this would have seemed like a dream. It would have seemed like a fantasy.
Absolutely. It's interesting. I'm working now on my first documentary feature. And I will tell you the sort of kernel that inspired it is this. My mother was, after having been an actress and a singer, my mother went to medical school. She worked for the public health service on the Navajo reservation. She decided she wanted to change systems, not just sort of be an employee, but actually be a leader. And so she went back to school and got a master's in public health and started studying this brand new disease that they were trying to figure out called AIDS.
Oh,
so
wow.
She was an AIDS researcher from 1986.
Wow.
And she was part of the team that did the first large-scale study, at that time, large-scale study of women living with AIDS. And wound up being somebody who really championed equity within combating HIV and AIDS before we had a language for that, right? They call her now the mother of PrEP. So if you've ever seen any commercials on television where they're like, there's a pill or a shot that you can take that will prevent you from getting HIV, she was one of many amazing, phenomenal researchers who figured out how to make that medicine happen, who tested it to make sure it was safe. And then she was the one who wrote the guidelines for PrEP for doctors in the United States. But as my mother got older, not only was she older, and we talked about this earlier in the conversation, right? How, we can sometimes get caught up in our looks because our society really values youth over wisdom. She also gained weight. She was a little overweight. And so this thing would happen to her that I always called being invisible, because I felt like it was a thing that people did to her. So we would go to like a shoe store, to a fancy shoe store, and she'd be looking for shoes that would be comfortable because she, worked really, really hard and her feet hurt sometimes. And the shoes, they might be $200, $300, right? And the sales staff wouldn't even acted as if she wasn't in the store, right? Wouldn't look at her, she'd have to ask them for help. And I always felt like, in certain settings, like, you don't understand, this woman, Dr. Dawn K. Smith, saved the life of someone you love. Her work will save the life of someone you love. How dare you treat her like this, right? And I was like, I want to make a documentary about you. And she was like, no, I don't want a documentary about me, right? I'm focused on doing the work. I want to do the work, right?
Well, so I'm glad you're doing the doc. I think you really should do the documentary.
It's not actually a documentary about my mom. No, this is the kernel that caused me to.
Oh, okay.
So I realized that there was a friend of mine who was also being invisible because she was a woman of a certain age, right? And she wasn't paid attention to. So I have a friend whose name is Tora Rocha. She's Portuguese American. She is passionate about gardening, and specifically about gardening in ways that help our pollinators. I think a lot of people have heard about like the butterflies and the bees, right? And how important they are to our ecosystems. And Tora will tell you in a heartbeat, if like honeybees are actually from Europe, we have native or indigenous bees in the United States, thousands and thousands of species of them that pollinate everything, right? And she's like, people always think water is essential, and water is essential, But the pollinators, if we lose them because they pollinate our plants, all plants die. The pollinators are actually as important as water is.
Yes.
Right. So she's really passionate about gardening in ways that don't kill our pollinators, whether that's honeybees, whether that's bats, whether that's native bees, whether that's butterflies, whether that's hummingbirds, right? There's all these different pollinators. And she was working for the city of Oakland as a gardener, and the budget got cut. And so she was trying to figure out how to be able to afford to not have the gardens that the city runs die. And she came up with this idea with a friend of having a light festival where she invited LED artists, and she curates the show. She works with them so that every art installation actually highlights some part of the gardens. So one of the things they're famous for is they put little single bulb LEDs into trumpet flowers. Mm-hmm. And then there's another artist who makes these beautiful glass sculptures that hang in the trees with the trumpet flowers, and they're lit up as well, right? Mm-hmm. So that festival is called the Autumn Lights Festival. And that's the documentary. The documentary is about the Autumn Lights Festival and this woman named Tora who started it. And when I first started filming the documentary, I'd filmed the Light Festival and people were walking around. This is so magical. This is wonderful. I wonder who did this, blah, 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 blah. And last year was the first year that we actually followed Tora around, and we were filming Tora at the Light Festival. And when people saw our camera pointed at her, it made her visible, right? And people started saying to her, wait, are you involved in this? Wait, is this your festival? And she was able to say, yeah, I'm the executive director of the nonprofit that runs this festival. And seeing that happen for her, it, like I said, like I always want to be working in partnership when I'm making a movie, right? Mm-hmm. And she sort of felt like at first, like, well, I don't want to be seen. But seeing people, we have this expression now, right? Seeing people give her flowers in the moment at the festival was so heartwarming and so lovely. Of course, I'm going to finish the film, but if I never finish the film, right? But of course, we're getting ready to do a crowdfunding campaign. I'll share that information with you. But seeing her get her flowers in the gardens during the Light Festival, seeing people see her and go, thank you. I love this festival. Oh my God, it's so wonderful. What a great thing you have built, right? To me, that's what it's all about,
Yes.
That's the power of the camera, even before the film is finished, right? And what a beautiful power it is when it's wielded wisely.
I love that. A beautiful power when it's wielded wisely, especially towards someone that wouldn't necessarily put herself at the forefront saying, this is what I'm doing. So there's so many complex layers to everything that you shared. One, this idea of visibility and invisibility, and makes me think of all of the programs, all of the resources that we have, and we don't know who's responsible for it. We, take it for granted. And, this sounds a little silly, but whenever I remember, I don't do this all the time, but when I remember, I say, thank you for the food on my plate and for everybody involved in bringing the food to my plate, from the farmer to the truck driver to the cashier, at the grocery store. And I don't do it all the time, but when I remember, when I say I'm grateful for this meal, I try to include people, because there's so many invisible people that affect our lives in so many ways. So I think that's just scratching the surface of that concept.
And let me say this again, they are not invisible.
They make themselves invisible.
When we fail to acknowledge them, we make them invisible, because their families see them, mm-hmm. right? Their friends see them. They are not invisible. We invisible them. They are invisible if we let them be invisible. And so how precious is it that you in that moment are thinking to thank them, right? Are thinking to put that energy out into the universe, right? Like, I see you. And I am thankful for your contribution that has made this joyful meal on my plate.
And I'll tell you, I started to think a lot about this because I do come from higher education. And I'm just going to go ahead and say it. I haven't said this publicly before, but I'm going to do it now. It might get edited out. We don't know yet. But, one of the things that I've witnessed, and it might have just been my experience. So, I'm trying not to generalize, but it's something that was part of my experience that I witnessed. It could be different for somebody else. Was this idea, it wasn't even an idea, this practice where faculty and students, they're at the center of university life, and rightfully so, because students go to a university to learn. So therefore, it's about them. Faculty are important because they are nourishing and feeding the minds of said students. But I also think staff is equally important, and they often get forgotten. Without that staff person helping the student fill out, maybe their financial aid application, or, somebody at the health center, it would make the student experience a lot more difficult. Like I said, I don't want to generalize. This is just some things that I saw. There was certainly a different benchmark and a different way of speaking to and treating staff. Now, that's not to say people are unkind towards staff. No, I didn't say that. But there was certainly different value systems. And it really has made me think a lot about the different roles that we have in society and who we assign value to and who we don't assign value to. And it makes me think about, some of the people who pour their heart and soul into what they do, and some of them are recognized and some of them are not. And I noticed that, sorry, let me just finish this last thing.
Finish.
And one of the things I realized is sometimes the people that are recognized the most are the people with the highest of titles, because they've got a certain title within not just a university setting, but within some type of organization. Oh, the ED did this, the president did this, this person did this, but they had a team helping them to do it.
Yeah. I will just say, I think part of the process of leadership is remaining ever vigilant for things like that, right? I learned something really precious from my daughters. And that was, they were talking about something, and I realized that they knew the names of not only all the staff at their school, not only the guards, the security guards at their school, they knew the names of the custodial staff as well.
Oh.
And it was such a powerful experience. And I sort of was like, well, okay, so, Mr. Carl, like, what is he, they were talking about Mr. Carl, and they were like, oh yeah, he works in, he takes the garbage out of the classrooms. And I was like, but you talk about him all the time. And, and one of my daughters was like, yeah, I talk to Mr. Carl often. Like, he's got some wisdom to share, and he looks out for us as kids. And, I can say in this moment, sort of retelling that story, he was helping to set the culture of the school.
Yes.
Right? He was absolutely positively creating an environment where my children felt safe, where they felt connection, where they could ask questions that maybe the people with the degrees didn't have as good an answer to, right? This was in middle school, and middle school is a place where I think most children have a horrible experience. And, there's a famous sort of age that happens around 2 or 3, where it's sometimes all the way up to 5, where kids are like, why? They're like, why is the sky blue? And why, if a rainbow is made of raindrops and there are millions of raindrops, why don't we have a million rainbows? Why do we only have one? Like, they ask you this really interesting kind of science question. But in middle school, there's a whole other set of questions that are really heart-based, where they come home and they say, why are people so mean? where they say, why does this group of kids not want to talk to this group of kids? You know, it might for some kids start around fourth grade, but through those, you know, fifth through eighth through ninth grade years, they are asking us as adults, like, why don't you grown-ups, pardon my French, why don't you fix fucking homelessness? This shit is ridiculous. How do you even let this happen? They get really angry. They're sort of built for rebelliousness. And to me, it's just as magical as the why is the sky blue, right?
Yeah.
Mr. Carl was like part of their team of people who they went to with those questions, right?
Yeah.
And he didn't give them the intellectual, like overthought answer. He gave them the from the heart answer. You know, he gave them the kind of down to earth answer. And so, yeah, like when I say I make films in partnership with, right? I have partnered with people who are not just invisible, but truly, I'm saying it as an act that has happened to them, right? They were disadvantaged. Not they were a person who happened to have disadvantage. They were a person who was treated in horrible ways by our society, was given the short end of the stick over and over and over and over again, right? And I think it is so important for us to think about the ways we were raised, the things we were taught, you know, and when those things are divisive or say that one group is higher or lower than the other, to break them, to say, no, everyone has value. Everyone on the team is important. Everyone together builds whatever this thing is. And I, as a leader, my job is to make sure that everyone has what they need in order to have the courage to be creative, in order to feel safe, suggesting something better, which might be something different than the way that we've always done it.
Yes, I love it. And CB, we can talk for hours and I will be absolutely fascinated and thrilled and inspired just because there's so much depth to the way you speak and passion in terms of, you know, the different topics that inspire you.
Same. I feel the same about you.
But in the interest of time, I would like to ask you just to share briefly with our audience a little bit about the crowdfunding you're doing for this documentary, for this docu-film. And if also you can let people know how to get in contact with you, if they want to be a part of your projects, if they want to partner with you, because, you know, you fill so many hats from camerawoman to director to writer and so forth.
So the easiest way to reach me is cbsmithdahl.com, cbsmithdahl.com. There's a form there that you can fill out that will send me an email. If you want to work with the company that I run, Together Pictures, there's also a form there that will ask you a little bit about the scope of your work that you're trying to do. That's togetherpictures.com. And if you're interested in following the crowdfunding campaign, it will launch on Seed and Spark, but you can find more information about that when it launches on togetherpictures.com/ and the documentary is probably going to be called By the Light of the Garden. That's the working title right now. So if you're seeing this podcast or hearing this podcast in like 2025 or 26, you should be able to find the documentary. We should be done with it by then. But
if you're listening to this podcast in 2023 and you want to be a part of this docu-film, please go to the website and see how you could get involved. CB is quite humble. She talks about her collaborations and, you know, the way she really tries to work with people, but she's also a very hard worker, and her projects always speak to not just her creativity and her leadership, but also the way the projects do connect with the human spirit. And if you care about the environment, if you care about our future, or if there's a project that you would like to partner with CB, please reach out. She is incredibly talented.
Oh my goodness. Thank you, Cindy. I feel the same way about you.
Thank you, CB. It's been a true joy. Thank you.
Definitely. Same here. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on Presents. For more information on how you can create greater levels of impactful presence in your professional and personal life, visit www.cindyurrutia.com and follow me on social media. If you haven't subscribed, please do so. Feel free to post a comment and we'll read it on the show.